plastic bags. That's chicken.
Yeah, where shall we start? And you can always interrupt me when I talk, because I will interrupt you also.
Okay, I think I know that crazy.
For me, standing here, I feel very emotional and vulnerable. I feel almost like the first time I got a teaching job in Holland. So I start to talk, and I say, you know, I come from South Africa, I do all my confessions, and I say, art gave me this problem, and that problem, and they stand like that. And I say, don't you have any problems? So I've been asked different questions hundreds of times by now, and every time it depends on which stage of your life sometimes, there's a different answer. That's also why it's very difficult to find just one answer, because I don't think there is only one answer. So whether you're well-known or not well-known, the things that interest you and gives you problems, they will always stay that way.
Against the light.
I think I see a man against the light.
Hi.
I don't believe it.
Hello. I know.
Got an enormous light shining
I know.
here.
Oh, sorry. Oh my God, that's awful.
For me, so I.
Okay, we'll re-gift it.
So I think so. We re-gift because I want to share with you. I hope it's okay. I would very much like to drink something. Where shall I put?
Come inside. I'm presuming wine rather than whiskey, but we have both.
No whiskey.
Just some wine.
Yeah. And don't tell me you did this too, huh?
Which? These? No. When I was in Italy, our friends Claire and Rose said, it's ridiculous that I can't paint, and I had to come to Italy, and they were going to give me painting lessons. I kind of enjoyed painting them, and I thought I could be a Sunday painter. I could enjoy painting on the weekends. Yeah, and that's a child you've got.
I mean, that's...
That's why they sit in the kitchen. They're not shown anywhere else. But also, you know, the mayonnaise... I would like to make it still. And the mayonnaise, which we also like.
Yes.
Mayonnaise.
So I said, yeah, you are... hoe zeg je, voor mij, hè?
Yes.
You're already starting on...
Yes. No,
you're ahead of me, because I'm working up to the still life.
Working up to the still life.
Yeah, because I think all the things that I've always said I don't like or can't do, now I think, okay, it's a challenge. Maybe, I don't know. I didn't sort of want to be a painter, but I was always told I am a painter, and in the end I I accepted that maybe that is then what I am.
For me, I suppose it was okay to not be a painter. For me, the important thing was discovering some context in which it was okay for me not to have to paint.
Yeah.
But I mean, when I say I was relieved to discover that I didn't have to be a painter, it wasn't because I didn't want to be a painter. I absolutely wanted to be a painter, but at a certain level, one has to understand the power of incompetence to not be a painter. And for years when I was drawing, I thought, okay, I'm drawing now, but one day I will use canvas and oil again, and then I will be a real artist. I was sort of dragged kicking and screaming by other people to say it's okay to be making a film that can also be art.
I was always jealous of the filmmakers, because I really thought, you know, beautiful paintings has been made, but I thought there was an incompetence in painting, actually, which I really admired in filmmakers. The young people also, they all really relate very well to your work. They all want to make animations.
I know. There is so much animation. first saw your ink wash heads, I had the feeling, damn, if only I'd thought of that, I could have done that. So it was a sense of saying, oh, yes, OK, it all makes complete sense. I understand the logic, the impulse, the pleasure. Whereas the paintings themselves, I think, OK, that's not a medium I would begin to know how to use, and they work in a very different way. The pleasures of charcoal for me was that it was alterable, that you could, because it's a very soft, you can just wipe it with your hand or with a cloth, and you've erased 80% of what you've done. One of the things that I couldn't deal with painting was that I couldn't work out how to alter a painting, how to deal with the wetness, how to actually...
I wipe it off too.
A lot of it looks like it's done and that's it.
Well, with the watercolor, the thing is indeed to do it as quickly as possible. For some of my paintings that is much thicker, it is so thick because I changed my mind, but I never wait for the painting to dry because I'm too impatient. The fact that I wipe off a lot with the tubes is actually a way of almost like you use your So when sometimes at last in the middle of the late night, something can sometimes come together, it can happen very quickly.
Yes, we're working on our production of Wojciech. So the studio is taken over into a theatre rehearsal room at the moment, so there's nothing on the wall. So this is the set for Wojciech. I either put the camera up there and film down,
Okay.
or put somewhere in the middle of the room at the wall.
Because I did see, but on photographs you can never see things properly.
It looks enormous from the photo.
Mine?
Yes.
Oh, no, mine is very low ceiling. Okay. And have you seen the photograph?
In the catalogue?
Oh. Okay. No. But so if you draw in that, where do you sit then? You sit at the table?
Well, usually I stand at a wall and draw on the wall. Okay. No, the whole wall is softboard, the whole...
Oh, okay.
So you can pin it anywhere around That's
at last we've got something in common.
That was the vital thing, to understand that every surface is a pinboard. Because before they spend so much time resticking and moving and shifting.
Yes.
And here just to be able to... The house I'm in is the house that my parents were in, so there are still kitchen cupboards full of objects and sometimes even food from the 1960s that have kind of been forgotten about. And objects which are either going to get turned into sculptures or become parts of theatre projects, like some 19th century egg whisks from a shop in France, which became a Herrera woman in black box.
Here's a... And this is my studio before that I had for 25 years or more, had a smaller space in which I drew, and I used a softboard there to... That was one of my things that I used for putting, I worked on the floor with the drawings, and then I would put them on the walls and with pins or push pins, and so you would go from the floor to the wall, and that's why they also have a lot of holes in them, because I would look at them. So the whole place is newspapers that I still wanted to go through to see the images in the newspapers and other clippings that got reordered, but it is basically all two-dimensional things.
But you have folders, which is like heads.
Yeah, I try.
Even though it's scattered, there's a sense in which it's locatable.
Yeah, and that's why I also don't like people cleaning up my place, so I don't want them to find the things.
In the past, people would have had sketchbooks where they would have kind of had this record of faces or heads or things they'd seen.
But you still make sketches now, in little notebooks?
Sometimes. Most of my sketchbooks have got phrases or sentences rather than drawings. We have to try to measure. How do we find him that we believe the thoughts are coming out of his head? So it must be more on stage, I think. Yeah. And looking on stage, rather. Yeah. Yeah. That's better. This, I think so. We're just re-rehearsing Wojciech now. And suddenly realized I'd forgotten those. We did that 15 years ago. All sorts of images, characters, things in it have been repeated for the last 15 years, which I'd kind of forgotten about. Each time you think it's a new idea, you think, oh, I'm doing a new picture. I haven't done this before. And then when it's finished, you say, oh my God, I've did the same thing here and there, all the way around. So the kind of actors that are pressed into service, the same troupe of actors that have to come and perform every night. I must get out of here. I must get out of here. I often think of the poor damn rhinoceros that goes through. That was my different work. He thinks, for God's sake, put me out to pasture, and then another film comes, and he gets dragged out again, and he's got to do his series of tricks and...
With me, the little girl appears sometimes before I had a daughter. Not exactly the same, but things come back. So if there's a period, say, maybe of more sexual things, there is maybe afterwards, then it could be that it becomes more somber again. Mr. Pinker, who taught me, one of the things he said, you know, painting was about color. So if you can't use color, you're not a painter. And that used to upset me quite a lot, because at that stage, I used color, but I just used any color, you know, so it wasn't really that, because that you often see in many paintings of people. They use a lot of color, but you can't really say it's about color. Some of my paintings are actually very graphic. They're much more about light and dark. But then other paintings, when you see them in the real, it's actually the color that makes the difference. Certain colors I don't use so often. I like to use blues, for example, and so. And colors, as I say, it's so strong that if you have a red face, whether it's a good painting or a bad painting, it sort of, it takes up its space, sort of. I find red difficult. I use it sparingly because it can really take over, actually. So in the illustration, say, and the red would stand for blood, but red is not always blood, you know, just as white is not always a race, it can be a color. Then if, say, for some reason, most of the paint is finished and there is only certain browns or grays left, you know, then one can also make a painting out of that.
I I used red, which I draw with myself, because then you've got both. It's like a photograph, where you've got a photograph, the charcoal drawing is the photograph, and then you've got sort of forensic notes on top of the photograph. So you'd have that with a white marker or something drawn on top. So it just differentiates those marks from the drawing underneath. And it's very rare that I use the footage that I filmed in colour. It's usually drained of colour. But when I do use colour, it's usually found colour. I trust other palettes. Most of the paintings that I admire are full of colour, or have colour, not full of colour. Have colour. So it's not saying, oh, I really like... It's absolutely not saying, oh, the pictures I like are pictures that look like mine. Usually pictures that look like mine I want to keep far away from. No, so you look at a Chardin still life and think, God, to use colour like that, or a piece of Alaska cloth, and think, God, to be able to work with colour in that way. Yeah, it's a sense of regret, but I would also love to be able to sing or play a musical instrument, and it seems as far away as that. So in the end, I'm sorry I can't sing, but it doesn't keep me awake at night, not singing. In a very direct sense, I'm sure the understanding of landscape always felt different from conventional views of landscape. European images of water, of leafy trees, of mountains, all the traditional things when one thinks of easy landscape painting, none of which were there in Johannesburg. There's certainly something about Johannesburg that influenced thinking about kinds of drawings that can be made. What is it to draw a mine dump rather than a mountain, or a culvert rather than a river?
I don't draw the Dutch landscape, and I've always didn't really feel, indeed, coming from Cape Town, I miss a mountain, and Amsterdam is so wet. So you miss the crackling of the dry grass and stuff like that, even though this is not things that I directly use in my work. One of the first sort of projects at art school where we had to do something about object transformed, that I actually there took the human body and I turned it into a landscape a bit, the navel and the breasts and the... So I then realized that maybe the fact of the close-up in the paintings, that the face becomes so big that the face actually becomes the landscape. I never really wanted to paint a type. My idea was to have every portrait different, even if they are then grouped together, that they still have to have an individuality.
When I was a child and I went to art lessons, we were taught when I was 8 or whatever, we were taught that in a man, lines mean character, and in a drawing of a woman, lines mean age. I mean, for me, one of the great paintings was when I saw the Stanley Spencer painting of himself and his wife with the leg of mutton. It was the first time seeing a woman painted with aging flesh and not breasts that stuck right up, but had the weight of gravity. And for me, it was a kind of revelation that one could make a painting like that, that people existed like. So that, in a way, it kind of gave an answer that, yes, there's a very different way of looking at women that doesn't just have to be in the paradigm of pearly, smooth skin.
There was a time when the certain blonde American girl seemed to be, she was always Miss World type of thing. But I actually now find a lot of that ugly. I think beauty is things also, when something loses its meaning for you, it becomes ugly also. It's not quite good enough, but what one calls kitsch often.
I'm trying to think also to distinguish between the work of art and what is depicted.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
that's also important.
Beautiful David Goldblatt photographs of what looks like a god-awful piece of dusty felt. And when you've seen the photograph, does the felt itself become beautiful? Or can you say, no, no, this is beautiful, but the referent is... A series of different skull drawings in black box, which related to skulls being sent back to Germany from Namibia and being measured for deciding what's a European skull, what's a black skull, all of those questions. And those were based on photographs of different skulls that I found. And I tried to draw them kind of conscientiously. But was I trying to do beautiful drawings? No, I was trying to do drawings that captured the skull and that had them drawn. They were drawn on top of old ledger pages, so there was something. And certainly I used that paper because there's something that was very comfortable between the charcoal and the surface of the paper, kind of a slipperiness that made a lot of light to come through. And I understood, okay, they fit into a tradition of people who've painted or drawn skulls, so it's not shocking like a baby. It's not there isn't a tradition of huge, oversized, naked newborn babies. There's not a tradition of images of that, but there is a big tradition of what could be a horrific image, the newly flayed bone of a head.
With the babies, I do think one of the main reasons that people are a bit disturbed is because they are so big. Yeah. They're very big, so psychologically... well, I just want to ask him, do you find my babies ugly?
I think I do. I don't know. I don't know what it means. I mean, that's such a hard question.
Okay, but we'll come... Because it was from snapshots from her after she was born. I think the snapshot is much more frightening. You know, the child can go. And I think it's also what you are used to in painting, it seems to.
Absolutely.
You know.
Is that a category you think of? Yes. Do you think, am I making a beautiful painting or an ugly painting? No. Or do you?
No.
There's something in us that when we see it and we get pleasure from it, we call it beauty. That's a...
I just want to say, you just said, so your definition, I just said, you said something that gives one pleasure, we would call beautiful. Well,
in this sense, that's what I'm saying. It feels such an inadequate sense of what it is. When you see a Jericho painting of guillotined heads, which is horrific, and you say, why is that not terribly ugly? But one's response is, God, what gorgeous painting. I mean, for me, it wouldn't be a contradiction to say, this is so beautiful, this is so ugly, that one could say both of those statements and accommodate both kind of at the same time. So beauty as a counterpoint to ugliness doesn't really work for me, I think.
A painting needs a wall to object to. If you look at it, you will see that actually she doesn't have a nose. Because the paint suggests certain things, you see those things, but they are not always even really definedly there. Certain things, you think you've seen, but it isn't actually there. I make a suggestion through the paint, and then you start to see that.
Generally, in either books or in paintings, the thing that I'm interested in or that comes back to are the riddles that you can't completely solve. Whether it's a formal thing, the shape of a leaf in a Matisse painting, why is that leaf square and the others are oval, or odd riddles that are there that don't quite ever make sense. But kind of wanting to shift that into coherence is the needle that keeps pulling you back into to re-looking at the painting. I mean, I suppose the long-term hope or the long-term trajectory of a lot of the films that I make is that they are neither meaningless nor do they have a meaning that can be fixed. And it's the belief that there is something that is between those two.
But meaning is for me really also a term, a language term. Meaning comes afterwards. You know, meaning is... or you give meaning to something. I mean, people write books to explain what the work is about. The curators write statements. So people are all the time, indeed, using the written word and the words, actually, to talk about visual things. So I don't deny that, and I want to also play with that. Oh, I hate that word in the Dutch where they sort of talk about artists. They say you sort of put someone on the wrong leg or so, as if I deliberately want to sort of, you know, I know what I'm doing, but I deliberately not going to tell you because I'm doing totally something else. That is not what one is talking about. I mean, images are ambiguous in themselves. You know, so I do want to give you the context, because that was a good word, in which the area in which I'm then thinking. This is a mixture of images of the last photographs that some of the suicide bombers that they had taken of themselves. They were relatively so young and vulnerable, and they decided to, this is the cause, and you also would like to live and you're young. But among them, there's also, this was the boyfriend of my daughter at that time. And as soon as someone gets grouped together as a group, then, you know, they all start to look the same. It's not that the meaning is so open. I wouldn't like someone to look at them and say, oh, what horrible-looking people, you know. I mean, I want to at least give you my bit of the way I see it to start with. But, I mean...
I suppose it's a question of, can one have meaning that's not reductive? Can one have the idea that meaning is as open-ended as the work itself? There's sometimes incredibly different readings of the work. Like somebody says, well, why did you draw a white woman in that film, in Felix in Exile? And I can say to them, well, in fact, the model for that was a black woman, but in fact, the person on the drawing is charcoal. She's neither black nor white.
Yeah, exactly.
And but in that sense, it's absolutely somebody seeing it in a certain way. And sometimes, yeah, people want them to be different. They're saying when you're drawing Johannesburg, that's fine. As soon as you're not drawing Johannesburg, you don't know what you're doing.
My drawing is called Black Drawings. This is a group where all white people is excluded, so it's only black faces. And the first time it was exhibited in Holland, they immediately said, you know, they put it in the apartheid context, and they also thought that these people were all, you know, looked like victims, for example. And then I exhibited in America once, and then the big dark black man came up to me, and then he said that he thought that it was really very strong portraits, that he hasn't seen such strong portraits of people being depicted, and he did not go necessarily to that side. And it is wonderful sometimes that you can be surprised.
At how people see things. Yeah.
The description already, how someone says, why is it such and such? It is not such.
I just want to know, with your paintings or your drawings, I mean, they all have quite specific titles associated. Do they come long after, or sometimes do you have a title before the painting or halfway through?
They mostly come afterwards. The painting has to be able to carry its title. The painting, The Painter of my daughter, for a long time I knew I wanted to paint this picture of her standing there, and she's painted herself. But I thought of titles like The Noble Savage, for example. But I thought, yeah, but that gives all wrong...
association.
I don't really want to go that way, but I did find it interesting that she's very young and that she does have this sense of wanting to paint herself. So I was struggling in these different areas. it is also like the painting of the face, the painting of the body. So then I also sort of, Picasso, always the male artists are painting the woman. And so she was sort of like a stand-in for me too. And so I thought, okay, the painter.
The project I was interested in when I was thinking about what is in the news that's been and gone, what are the points of connection of that kind of ethnic cleansing. Now, the 1935 Italian campaign in Ethiopia, poison mustard gas was used against Ethiopia, which was something that was denied by the Italian government until very recently. In fact, it's still denied by parts of the Italian military. The film itself started off just being interested in exploring what happens with a cylindrical mirror if you make a film using anamorphic projections. Was it possible to make a film the way that these drawings work? These drawings are then filmed from above and successively altered and changed. And all that happens in the film on the side is that these images then get projected back. So where there was a drawing, there's now a projection, and you see it in the mirror. And you can see a trace here of the bird that flies around. So that got drawn and rubbed out and filmed. So the hardest part was lifting the mirror off, which is enormously heavy, between each frame to shoot the frame and then putting it back.
But the drawings themselves with animation have to happen fast.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're also actually quick, yeah.
They have to be fast, otherwise you spend, you've got to make so many alterations. And one of the things I've discovered with the animation, in fact, if it's done really roughly, even if in the moment you can hardly see what it is you've drawn, once it is in movement and projected, it constitutes itself and you can kind of see the figure. I mean, sometimes there's no short way. The figure's over here, and somehow he's got to walk to the other end of the sheet of paper. You've got to erase him and redraw and read. And there's not a kind of a pleasure of discovery in each alteration. And then it feels like being kind of deeglik. You've just got to be conscientious and do it. But on the scale of animators and the kind of obsessiveness with which some work, I'm very slipshod. Some people spend years on a 3-minute film. For me, it would be unbearable. And if there's a sequence which is going too slowly, then I'll kind of compensate myself by then having an easy sequence the next day, which is many seconds long with relatively few alterations. A moment in the film I made in which a man kisses a woman's hand and he needs to leave like an erotic gift. And at first, okay, we could have this horse that's galloping around and around and around. And I thought, my God, to draw that horse is going to take an hour. And then to erase it and redraw it, I'll be here for a week to get it to do one half circle. Whereas everybody knows how to draw a fish, and then to film it and to rub it out and draw the fish in a new position. And in half an hour, you could have a fish starting to circle the hand. And in the end, the fish was a much happier image also, slipping off the hand as a kind of slippery, kind of half sperm, half wet thing that bounced on the hand and dropped off.
coming back just to do a charcoal drawing is like a treat. So that's always that's kind of like time off in the studio. When other projects are under control, then to come and either work on a small scale or on a larger scale is kind of my vacation to myself. That's meeting an old friend. It's going to be a comfortable conversation. One of the things I've learned about drawing from animating is the speed. The speed, which is a necessity in the animation, becomes a kind of a virtue in the drawing. Not a virtue, but it helps the drawing. If one gets too precious about knuckle movements that take too long, then one gets anxious about erasing it with a wipe of a cloth. In the end, of course, this gets solidified into a fixed final image rather than continuing till it's moved off the sheet of paper or becomes something else. So it gets a bit more precious. So one of the troubles about drawing on a table is that there's not that much new viewing of the image. You're watching the same image the whole time. Whereas when you're animating or when you've got the drawing on the wall, it's a movement away where you can't see what you've done, and the moment when you turn around, when you see it again afresh. Both of ideas about the world, but also finding something that meets your ideas halfway. It's an image that calls to be drawn. In this case, cameras are beautiful things to draw as objects.
Yeah, I saw your camera looks sexier than your male character sometimes. He'll forgive you.
There's a lot of passion that's gone into drawing with camera many times. Different cameras.
Indeed, it is strange for people often because I speak about intimacy, indeed, and love stories and this and that I almost always use a photograph. I was surprised, actually, to see that I almost never use the camera myself. I once made a little film, only once, and I tried to walk with an old Super 8 camera. And I realized how extremely irritating I would go like this, and everything I saw I couldn't see through the lens. So I have a strange relationship with the camera itself. When the picture is already taken, when it is already two-dimensional, reality, then I feel very free with it. There was a whole book, I think, that also that, what's his name, David Hockney wrote. He says the camera is like a cyclops because it's got one eye and we've got two eyes. And some, you know, I thought, ooh, never thought of that before. The last portrait I made of Elizabeth Abers, for example, I realized that she is now, 92 years old. So this is the last part of her life, and I wanted to bring a homage to her. What expressed this for me was that the eyes were dark, never mind, and the face was very white. So it was more about this expression of this darkness in these eyes, where you are scared because your time is up, but you're also strong. So in her case, the urge to do a portrait of her was there already. And then I found the right photograph.
You then have to decide, okay, is it going to be 2 foot by 2 foot? Is it going to be 3 meters by 3 meters? And then is it a question of holding the photo in one hand? Or is it on a table and you walk back to the table and look at it and then walk to the hand? Or you look at it and I've seen it, okay, now I just go on with the painting?
I often project. I project the image, but not to get the details. I project the image to get the composition. I will zoom in on this bit, and everything that we don't need have to now fall off. Yes, because while you're saying this, I just want to say, because now it makes me think of in the very old times when people would use the grid. I never did that.
I'd been looking at Giotto and did some drawings based on Giotto, and then cut out all the heads to rearrange the heads, and that pile of heads based on the Giotto became the Casper's Full of Love, a series, a box full of heads. The Giottos are extraordinary in the sense of crowds, the way they are so much like movies, but also like news.
Yeah.
You think of the, the Massacre of the Innocents, which has at the bottom this pile of dead children, which you don't really see again till you see it in newspaper photographs, till you see it in documentary footage. I'm interested in rescuing the idea of politics from certainty. If you're still talking about the world and about power relations and things, within that discussion there needs to be a space for getting it wrong, for people not knowing, for uncertainty and doubt and confusion and contradiction. So I'm interested in trying to show that lack of clarity in the terrain that is normally described as the political. So one thing we've learned is not to trust men from the 18th century, men who assume they know what's best for everyone else. I mean, as we know, it's the prime, if there's one danger in the world, it's people assuming they know what's best for everyone else. Sometimes I feel these are all the extraordinary things that are happening in this country at the moment, and none of those are in my work at the moment. I'm thinking about something completely different. And so there is a twin saying, how do these things get in? Will they get in? Are they part of the work? I'm not sure. Until I can find a way that they feel right in it, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but I also don't think the artists have to... You can do certain things as a person. I mean, sometimes you should, out of respect, leave certain things alone, because they can do it better than you can.
I was drawing a series of images of people who had been killed, of dead bodies. Somebody got this whole pile of photographs of murdered people from the police. And there's something horrific about that box of photographs. Not something, a lot that's horrific in it. And on the one hand said, oh, well, is this just cheap? You take other people's pain or their other traumas and you turn it into art, and that's a different question. It's a real question, but it's a different one. And so the hope was that somewhere in that actual, in the process of making the drawing and in someone looking at the drawing is an awareness of the respect that those hours of studying that image and turning it from the photograph into the drawing entails. So I wouldn't say that a drawing of that body is more profound than the photograph of the body, but I think it can work in a different way.
Indlela sengiyibona
Somehow it comes over sometimes in a different way because you get a different expression. While a photograph in the newspaper, for example, or so, where action has happened, or someone is crying, or so, I mean, they are not posing for 10 hours, you know. I actually don't like the enormous long posing thing. I also don't want this naked person there with me.
For the 23 hours, no.
Yeah.
And in the animation, because it's so slow, you can't really have a model. I need you to stand here for 2 weeks, slowly turning from this side to that side. There are things one can say about oneself, which suddenly, if you're saying it about other people, you've got to take all sorts of responsibilities. For example, Soho Exton, the character in the film, there was accusation that it's anti-Semitic. Why have you drawn this nasty person as Jewish? In the sense of saying, OK, I'm going to take responsibility for that character as myself. In the series of Ubu etching, Ubu already comes with the way that he looks from Jarry, with a spiral belly and a pointed head. A very simple, childish drawing that Jarry did. And so I wanted to do something which both had that as one layer, like a chalk drawing on a background of Jarry's Ubu, and inside it a much more fleshy human figure. And for those etchings as well, I'll just take photographs of myself to use those for the reference. I was acting the part of Ubu, so it could be as ridiculous. Naked on a bicycle, riding around the studio, doing a crazy sort of dance, naked in front of a mirror. Things that if I'd said I'm going to do a drawing of myself, I would never have dared to do because they were so ridiculous. Yeah. So I think sometimes one has that sense of drawing oneself in the third person.
Yes, yes.
To say to someone, OK, here's OK, what I need you to do is to take off your clothes and here's my son's tiny bicycle, so your knees are going to be up around your ears, and to ride around the studio so I can, which I may or may not use. So sometimes, so I use myself. Sometimes I've used Anne, my wife, who's been very generous about doing these kinds of activities. But whereas I think some artists, it's fine. They, call in a model, and these are the ridiculous things I need you to do.
I have used naked bodies, again, for different reasons. Also, the Snow White one or so, I used myself in it, but that was not really it was not an inviting painting. And then the Magdalena's was more about confronting you. Say, OK, here I am,
But I hadn't thought, do I draw myself mainly or do I draw other people? If I now do a catalogue in my head, I'm trying to catalogue and go through all the different... make note, draw other people. And also, draw more heads. I love drawing heads. I've done it for a long time.
And my people is too immobile. They don't move enough. They mostly just confront you, or they fall down dead, or they sort of show their backsides, but they're not moving enough.
I've recently been looking at some 18th century pornography to look at just what were drawings done. I mean, there's one's familiar with kind of photographic pornography and how bodies join together in the extraordinary way in which bodies kind of shift from being objects of desire to suddenly being pieces of like open heart surgery, when it kind of dissolves, becomes a kind of meat. And using some of those as models for some drawings and some books that I've been making. But there is a restraint, and I kind of feel it needs the courage that you have.
Yeah, so, OK, say if one wanted to make without critique, without this, but really wanted to paint something that was for life and pleasurable and saying, OK, sexuality is OK. How would you do it then? What form would it take? how does it feel, the whole tone of it, not just sort of drawing a sexual act or so. You know, and then later also, what is the difference between, say, if I'm in love with you and I want to show that, what is then the difference between if I wasn't in love with you and I also drew you? I mean, so these type of things go on. So sometimes I feel I have used pornographic poses to say something maybe about a pleasurable experience and not so much about the porno.
It's not so much an anxiety about what would other people say, it's an anxiety about myself. If I was to be doing these pornographic drawings, would it in fact be exactly the same? Enjoying the eroticism and the desire exactly kind of as they are in the photographs, whereas yours go through such a transformation in that painting. You can see they're based on pornographic photos, but they're not trying to do the same thing that the pornographic photos do.
Yeah, for example, I saw a beautiful exhibition in a very early Chinese pornography, if you would call it that. But what was so beautiful about them is these people they are doing these things, but they're drinking tea, and the leaves are done with the same delicacy. Yeah, it's also so interesting, the difference between those Chinese works and then the Japanese works. And because with the Japanese works, for example, of a specific period, they always have enormous, they're also very elegant, but the men are always enormous. And I'm sure it's not because the Japanese are so much more enormous than the Chinese, but it's again also a different attitude to life, because this was one of you can't just say porno or nude or deaf as if it's all the same, because every artist and every has the way they treat the whole thing. So this is, okay, they're doing sexually explicit acts, but they're doing it with, as I say, with the detail of the leaves and the clothes and little shoes is all equal to the sexual act almost. So that gives a whole different feel than, for example, you know, this Oshitoshi guy, but he's also fantastic. But here is much more, always something violent is happening. You know, there's a little bird also going, but he's cutting her throat and, you know, like this type of scenes. My goodness. I used this in one of my lectures. I said, well, this, you know, I never have anyone, at least in the bigger paintings, there's no one ever doing something to somebody else. The suggestions is there, so people make up all their stories also with many of the sexual things. Well, mostly you cannot see if the person is, you know, what they are doing. Well, this type of story, so he's indeed, he's blowing his own head off or so. So I always say, you know, if you say to me, I make a horrific thing, in comparison to what are you saying? You know, what is your context that you place it? And that's all what I mean. So as I say, it's not that you have to, you know all these things to say I'm moved by my painting or so, and always have to know, because it's beautiful. Sometimes someone who doesn't know anything can also have say something extremely meaningful or beautiful. And then you look at these things, and her hair and skirt fills in almost everything. And then comes all the other stories. And then, I get all jealous and excited, and I think, you know, maybe I can still do a painting with a dress on. I don't know what to do with the dress still. But anyway, you see, so that aspect, so that's when I'm sorry when people just think it's somber, and it's just because it is also filled with a lust for life a bit.
In one of the first from Johannesburg's second greatest city, which was made in 1989, the films had to go before the Publications Control Board in South Africa. And I remember the report came back saying, the film contains scenes of copulation and fellatio, however, they are sufficiently badly drawn so as not to cause offense.
There's certain films in which the technique of animation is erasure. So you have an image and you use an eraser to remove the charcoal to make the drawing. But the other kind of work that comes from the theatre work, from Wojciech, which was the first production, in which we had paper cut out shadow figures, was arriving at figures through tearing sheets of paper and finding what you recognized when they were put together, when the piece of paper put together. So for me, that's a different kind of destruction of the image, or destruction of what you expect an image to look like. A slow deformation of this nose into a different shape is not so obvious. So if you have your nose, it's easy enough to animate it fragment by fragment, shifting it, moving the nose, moving it along. Everyone wants this. But to transform it into something else, you must probably first have to and then in a sense have to explode the fragments as the pieces start shifting. It can transform and become goodness knows what. But that's also kind of why the tearing is an important part, because that's the mode, that's the way in which transformation is possible. At some stage, with almost all the films, there's a process of, I wouldn't call it research, is too high a term, but there's a kind of a gathering of information, of visual images, of photographs, of other drawings. Sometimes it was photographing people in the poses that are now, or the actions I know I'm going to need in the films. But usually that comes once the film has begun. If you know at the beginning, even roughly the whole arc, then I get blinded to a lot of other things that could emerge. There is a kind of confidence that's come from doing this from all these years, and the confidence is knowing that in any of the films where there's been something that's either surprised me or interested me, it's not been something I've known at the beginning of the film. So it doesn't make me more confident to do more and more work before the film starts. It makes me more anxious in the sense that I feel that every good idea I have before the film starts is going to get abandoned. But it has to do with, again, finding ways to surprise or to outwit, to get past one's own predictability, one's own stupidity. Usually it's a pleasure to have things out of the studio and gone. I mean, I don't have a precious attitude to wanting to hang on to everything around me.
There we agree, absolutely. I'd rather let them go.
Yeah.
Very pleased that they
Somebody
can
else
go.
wants them.
There is a pleasure in the fact that the work goes to a place or someone that really actually wants it. Mm. But sometimes one should look at them longer because there is indeed, it's different from the private space to the public space, because then suddenly there is more distance and you also see them in a different way. And that there's definitely a cooling off of atmosphere, because when you're around all your things and all your thoughts, and the public space is a colder space in a sense. And then
I mean, I quite often find on an exhibition works that I thought were the ones I really liked in the studio are not the ones that I really still like at the end of the exhibition, and others which I was quite uncertain about even putting on exhibition are the ones that seem much stronger. It's not as if being, having lots of exhibitions, things that stops you still being awake at 4 in the morning in a panic of anxiety. The specifics of the anxiety to change. So it's maybe not about, oh my God, is anyone ever going to buy a picture of mine? But it's still the same anxiety. Is what I'm doing actually going where it should be? Is it any good? Does it make any sense? If only I hadn't taken on this project, then I would be happy, but no, this one's definitely going to be. So that, I think, is built into the activity, for me, certainly, of being an artist. I'd hoped it would disappear, but it doesn't. But there's also no doubt that there's so many more kinds of projects that I would like to do are now possible, such as working in opera, working on a different scale. And then that brings with it its own set of anxieties. In other words, it's not the question, I can do these projects. That's different from should these projects be done at all. It certainly also means that if you do something, the first impulse of people is to look at it, to give it the time of day, rather than to dismiss it before they've actually looked at it, which is, if you're a young artist or starting out, that's generally the condition. So it does feel it feels a fortunate position to be in, there's no doubt.
But what is unfortunate is recently, because of certain auction things that happened, so you don't know anymore if someone quickly throws something on an auction, if they really actually ever liked it in the first place. And I never said all these things is worth, just because I make them, they are worth that. I would, I can be my own critic, but now, so sometimes all kinds of things get on auctions that's not so good, and I agree they're not so good, but I didn't put them on there. What is always so terrible, I find, when I have to start, is then I have in my head all these things, how I'm now going to be, make something totally different, and I'm going to, and then you start and it just goes totally wrong, and it's extreme mannerism and kitsch. When you do feel it works, then it looks so easy that people say, yeah, she's lazy, because she doesn't do anything. I was very pleased to read, I never knew that once Matisse, apart from that he's years ago dead, but also in a certain period of his life, he actually showed his process, he exhibited his process of how he got to a certain simplicity with photographs next to the work, because he wanted to show them that it didn't actually just go like this. And I never thought a man like him would think he needed to do that. Mostly, some is new, but many things are just rejects. Yeah, this is... This was once upon a time Sophia Loren crying. So in this painting, at a certain stage, I kept on going because of this. It wasn't, so obviously, not at all Sophia Loren anymore. There was nothing that related at all to that. That was clear. So then I go on with the painting, and I think, okay, let's see where it takes me. It goes this way, it goes that way. And it's hard to want to give it up because you feel, I would love to, to keep that. That's all the things they taught you at art school. Is if the painting now gets so thick that it's so overworked, then you can't get the freshness back. Well, here, yeah, he's gone this way, that way, you know, and so somehow that urgency is gone. Yeah, when it does happen in 3 marks, you are so pleased. It's like the grace of things coming together. And this is sometimes very irritating. You know, at a certain point where you have all these things, so you have all these, that's why I should immediately turn them all around, because you have all these things around you that actually is all just very irritating. And, but that's also why, then you have the show, and the show looks all clean and proper. So then you get the criticism that, yeah, there's no struggle or nothing, and you left with all the rubbish. Yeah.
I was thinking what you said the other day, that one should change. Staying the same is easy, changing is hard. Changing is hard. Change to what? Should I get a tailor? Should I get a private tailor? Should I start smoking cigars? What are the things that I should change? Should I get a toupee? Should I become a surf bum? No.
The other way around. I want to be more disciplined, for example, you know, and prepare myself before I come to situations like this and say, no, thank you, I don't speak in the morning, because you're a morning person. You say, I'm at a disadvantage. He looks much more intelligent than I am, because he's good in the morning, I'm good at night, but no one wants to speak to me. And I want more power in the real sense, you know. Animal painting, probably. If you send me a picture, I'll do something like these things will need different.
You think, oh, here's an ordinary statement about something, here's an ordinary statement, and then at the last minute, it turns on its head. And there's a bite in the tail. Art and children. Keep art out of the reach of children, like medicines.
But it's not so heavy. You have to look how the language also relates, you know. But anyway. But I wanted to go for my second helping.
Please, no, you must. You must. Come.